Greetings, everyone, and welcome back. This is the third segment, Set Apart, where we talk about what it means to be set apart and what it means to be self-sufficient, what it means to not depend on a system that is adverse to you. Today, we're going to read from two books. The one book I read from the first week, that is Surviving Off-Grid. I want to read another section of this book, but also we're going to read from a famous book that you might have come across called Behold a Pale White Horse. Today, what we're going to talk about is the Matrix. And I know you're probably sick of different references to the Matrix, saying that, oh, you didn't take your red pill, or hey, you're in the Matrix because you do this, you do that. The Matrix obviously is a very, very overused metaphor, but it fits so many circumstances, so you can't blame the fact that it's overused. Now, the Matrix, though, that I want to talk about is Western society. I more so now than ever, now that before when I've gone and visit Africa, but especially now that I'm living here, I recognize that outside of this global south, where people are starving in certain places, where people are struggling in certain places, where people are really fighting day to day in a different way, or where people are thriving also, and people are learning to take care of themselves without the system. See, there's two sides to this, right? I realized that inside of this global south, that the Western lifestyle is literally like a matrix, because you're given this life where you think that this is what life is about, but then you realize that the vast majority of the world is not living your existence. That doesn't mean that your lifestyle doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that you're living less than, but it does mean that if you don't take serious knowing what it is to be able to be self-sufficient, that you will basically be in the matrix. You'll basically be connected to a machine that's showing you what to do, showing you what you want to see, giving you your appearance, showing you what your life is like, instead of actually being inside of the world and enjoying the world for what it is. So I want to read from Behold a Pale White Horse first, because it gives this very good analogy. And I haven't finished this book, by the way. I'm still reading it. But when I read this the other day, it really jumped out at me. And I said, wow, this is a very good analogy for what it is like living inside of the West. And it talks about us living in a womb. And I think that's an analogy that I'll continue to use on this channel, is basically, are you in the womb? So here's what it says. I'm reading from page 59. From the time a person leaves its mother's womb, its every effort is directed towards building, maintaining, and withdrawing into artificial wombs, various sorts of substitute protective devices or shells. The objective of these artificial wombs is to provide a stable environment for both stable and unstable activity. Oh, I want to read that again. So you're in the womb. That means you have a stable environment for both stable and unstable activity, meaning things might be unstable, but your environment tells you that everything is stable. To provide a shelter for the evolutionary processes of growth and maturity, i.e. survival, to provide security for freedom, and to provide defensive protection for offensive activity. Read that again. Not just survival, but to provide security for freedom and to provide defensive protection for offensive activity. That shows you basically that even though you are living inside of a state that's doing things offensively, you are of the illusion that you are protected. This is equally true of both general public and the elite. However, there is a definite difference in the way each of these classes go about the solution of problems. So it goes into details about the political structure of a nation, dependency. The primary reason why the individual citizen of a country creates a political structure is a subconscious wish or desire to perpetuate their own dependency relationship of childhood. Simply put, they want a human God to eliminate all risks from their life, pat them on the head, kiss their bruises, put a chicken on every dinner table, cloth their bodies, tuck them in to bed at night, and tell them everything will be all right when they wake up in the morning. This is a clear indication, by the way, whether you're actually following Yahuwah, the Elohim of the scriptures, or whether you're following this man-made creation of a God. Because what does the scripture say? It says the kingdom of God suffers violence, but the violent take it by force. Meaning our life is not to basically be here and just get day-to-day affirmation and be treated like a child. No, there's actually some warring that you have to do. There's actually some taking of territories that you have to do. There's actually some action that is required. But if you are of the opinion that your life is just your clothes, it's your bed that you get tucked into at night, then you're not living in the actual word that was given to us of how we're supposed to live our lives. Now, going to the next page, it says, this public demand is incredible, so the human god, the politician, meets incredibly with incredibility by promising the world and delivering nothing. Again, why do you elect politicians that you know are not going to do anything or not going to deliver? Because you have this need in your mind that you have to be led by someone, even if they're not going to do what they said they're going to do. Who is the bigger liar, the public or the godfather? This public behavior is surrender born of fear, laziness, expediency, meaning I don't want to deal with the reality of what I'm dealing with, so let me push that responsibility onto you, politician. It is the basis of the welfare state as a strategic weapon useful against a disgusting public. And trust me, I'm not someone who buys into stereotypes of welfare queens or anything like that. But it's very true if you understand that there is an incentive by the welfare state to create a lack of awareness about your own necessity to be able to survive, to make you think that you need the state in order to do anything. Some people become into this mentality where they actually think that the Democratic Party is not just a political party, but they think it's their daddy. They think that they're going to deliver for them on their promises and that they're going to carry them into the next level of life. That's just not going to happen. So understand, this is a deception. They want you to think that they're there for you, that they're there to take care of you, but clearly they're not. Now, one more part, it says, most people want to be able to subdue and or kill other human beings which disturb their daily lives, but they do not want to have to cope with the moral and religious issues, such as an overt act on their part might raise. Therefore, they assign the dirty work to others, including their own children, so as to keep the blood off their hands. They rave about the inhumane treatment of animals and sit down to a delicious hamburger from a whitewashed slaughterhouse down the street and out of sight. But even more hypocritical, they pay taxes to finance a professional association of hitmen, collectively called politicians, and then complain about corruption in their governments. Let's even take it further, because this is really, to me, a good illusion of U.S. foreign policy. If you are in the matrix of the West, you are probably completely kept away from why it is that you live in such a nice, stable society or organized society, because you have been completely put in the darkness about what happens, what created this society. America was not always this nice, stable place. No, America went and stretched its tentacles around the world in order to make that stability happen. So the fact that you go to the grocery store and you have bananas that are imported from Panama, that you have oranges that come from Dominican Republic, that you can go down the street and you can have a gold ring, and the ring comes from South Africa. The fact that you have this convenience is literally a direct causal relationship to the U.S. military, to the U.S. CIA, to the global dominance, to the global Western hegemony that has created this world for you, created this womb for you, where every convenience you ever need is a trip to the store, is a phone call away. Now we have Amazon. It's a delivery away. All of these conveniences, they're convenient. Don't get me wrong. I mean, just definitely things are more convenient in the West, but they're conveniences that come at a cost, and you probably will never see that cost, especially if you only watch the mainstream news. So with that, I think this is a good segment to go to the book Surviving Off-Grid, because this section that we're going to get into, it's going to talk about what it does to you when you are dependent on the system, when you're living in the womb, what it can do to you if things go wrong, what happens if the host actually loses its ability to give nutrients to you, to take care of you. Well, this is a good example. So the 80-20 rule, and why I believe that it is overly optimistic. In every field of endeavor in which I have ever engaged, especially while I was back in the world, serving the world, acting in concert with it as a cog in its machinery, there existed what was called the 80-20 rule. Many of you have heard it. The 80-20 rule which, by the way, it's not Steve Harvey's rule, in case you're wondering, but it's flexible and it changes based on context. There are innumerable different situations of genres, but in general, it goes like this. You might say that 20% of people do 80% of the work, while 80% of people do 20% of the work. 20% of people are producers, 80% of people are consumers. 20% of people provide 80% of the benefits that sustain society. 80% of the people provide 20% of the benefits. While years ago, I was in a survival-related course and the instructor used the 80-20 rule. He said that 80% of people are victims just waiting to happen, while 20% of people are rarely victims because they are intelligent, engaged, they are aware, and they are responsive. Well, I'm going to go on record as disagreeing with the 80-20 rule in this case. I do not believe that anywhere near 20% of people are producers, workers, or survivors. I believe that in the West, not necessarily, again, in the Global South. I believe 20% is overly optimistic in virtually any situation. It is most certainly is overly optimistic when it comes to survival. In reality, most of the people you know, likely including you, I remember when I got to this part of the book, I just felt like he was talking to me. He said, if examined in a historical context, you are now viable or sustainable, meaning that you are not viable or sustainable. Meaning that they would not survive even a short amount of time after a systemic failure of the JIT, Industrial Consumer Life Support Grid, that is our world today. I call this Industrial Consumer Life Support System a perpetual 72-degree consumer womb. Another womb again. So if a situation was to arise where people were forced, even for a short amount of time, say for weeks or months, to live exactly as their grandparents did or their great-grandparents did or ancestors lived, they would die off in massive numbers in a very short order. And just give this picture. Picture this as what he's talking about. He says, here's an example. Even rural electrification was underway during the Depression of the 1930s. If a huge systemic disaster wiped out the entire electric system in America for a whole year, there likely would be 0 deaths that could be directly attributed to the power outage, meaning you probably won't die because the power goes out. So our base number is 0. By contrast, a similar unexpected and systemic loss of electrical power across the whole of America today would likely lead to deaths in the millions, meaning likely the hundreds of millions if the outage were to last for a single year. Which is not even, let it last for a month, people are going to die, right? Let it last for a week, people are going to die. Industrialism coupled with modern consumer capitalism has created generations of non-viable, meaning people who are unable to survive outside of the artificial womb of JIT life. Are you able to survive outside of the womb? Each generation more non-viable than the one before it. Absolutely. It's funny, like even one generation, how you find out what your parents did and it's like, what? You had to do that to actually live? Yeah. And if you go further back, people actually live without electricity. He goes on to say, each people with individuals who cannot and would not survive even the mildest of interruptions in goods or services without massive government outlays and government rescue programs. He says, we need to look no farther in our history books than Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Hurricane Ike in my state of Texas, to say how absolutely necessary massive government interventions with funds and materials are to short-term survival of modern man. In every case during the last several decades where massive disasters have been recorded, there has always been, however weak and or slow it may appear, an outside source of stability that was ready and able to jump in and provide aid and comfort to those who are otherwise unable to survive and support themselves. When hurricane after hurricane punished Florida and the American eastern coast in 2004, aid poured in almost immediately from the rest of the country and around the world. What happens when the response is not immediate, like Katrina? When Hurricane Katrina, historically not the biggest or most devastating, but it destroyed New Orleans, we saw the almost instantaneous devolution of society that saw the monstrous result of carnal people being stripped of the support structure that has become necessary to sustain them. Even those who did survive well enough, who did not riot, who did not loot, or who did not kill or rape, these are bolstered and supported by the knowledge that help was coming, and with an understanding that they could hunker down and wait it out. They would soon be returned to their former state of dependency on the system which sustains them. But what if it doesn't come? Now, this is interesting. Obviously, again, I told you all there's some views that this writer has that I definitely do not share. He's obviously someone who has a look at something like Hurricane Katrina, like, oh, look at those dependent people. We know all segments of society suffer from the same dependency. This is not something special to people who are inside of New Orleans versus people who are in Florida. America, period, is a womb. Now, something, though, that we do have to consider about when it does come down to the mentality that some of us can have in natural disasters. I don't know if you've ever seen the episode of Boondocks, if you haven't, when the cousins from New Orleans come during Hurricane Katrina. And his whole demeanor was, hey, cousin, let me, sit here, borrow from you. Let me just chill with you. My check is coming, the government's going to come through. My check is coming, the government's going to go through. The FEMA check's going to come through. Ultimately, it doesn't go through, right? Because the government failed. Now, if the government fails, are you going to be inside of a position where you're like, dang, now I'm basically screwed up? That happened to a lot of people, and that continues to happen all throughout different segments of society because the government will fail you, especially when you look like us. Now, he says, I'm going to make a statement that might shock some people, and you would do well to ruminate on it for some time. He said, I believe that if tomorrow there were some sort of massive and comprehensive systemic disaster resulting in a loss of JIT goods and services and a loss in available grid electrical power and water, and if that disaster, whether man-made or natural, caused a scenario when omnipresent paternal government could not or would not be able or willing to send any appreciable aid for a long period of time, that fully 1/2 or more of the population of the United States, or of just about any country for that matter. Again, this is specific to the West. I mean, that has to be emphasized. It's coming from a Western mindset. But he said would die in less than a year. 150 million deaths in less than a year just in the United States. And I believe that my prediction is probably on the conservative side. But Rome never thinks it can fail. And this is why I'm emphasizing it's just the West, because a lot of people live without power inside of the global South. But if you are someone who is dependent on the grid, consider that. If the electric grid were to go down where you are, if it were to go down for a week, if it were to go down for a month, if it were to go down for months, how long could you survive? Are you just holding off until the government can step in, until the government can come and put it back up? Or are you basically put in a situation where if they don't come put it back up, you're screwed? That's an important thing to ask. He said most people who read that might scoff or deny that such devastation could be possible. Like the Romans in 410 AD, they cannot conceive that any such thing could ever come to pass, nor can they begin to quantify the difficulties and realities of what will occur when such a thing does come to pass. Emphasize, it will come to pass, specifically for, I believe, America. He said, if Americans today were forced without warning to live just for 1 year exactly like their ancestors 150 years ago, the greater part of them would die in a very short amount of time. This is exactly what I mean by the perpetual 72-degree consumer womb. This is very definition of a system that is not viable, that is unsustainable. Most modernists are likely to disagree with me because most modernists do not have any idea what life would be, even on a very short-term level, without the government-sponsored artificial womb that has been created for them and in which they live now, and a remarkable departure from the historical experience of hundreds of billions of people who lived before our age. For the entire lifespan of virtually everyone who reads this, there has been a system in place to support and provide for all of those who are unable or unwilling to take care of and provide for themselves and their families. Now, be sure to understand me. I do not mean to say that people are unwilling to go to work. If it has proven anything at all, our age has proven that men and women are willing to do all manners of dehumanizing and mind-numbing work, so long as they believe that they are not ever to be made uncomfortable. I am saying that the most modernists are unable or unwilling to provide and support for their families outside of the comfortable and unsustainable JIT system. That has put everyone within it at risk. We are several generations removed from the last generation that had to make it off the land without a safety net or an artificial system which piped in their food, water, electricity, whatever else was necessary for their survival. I'm just going to finish this paragraph. Even when the term survival, as it is most commonly used today, implies lasting or making it through to a time or a place where the artificial womb of government or industry supplied material comfort and safety is in place. Meaning when you talk about survival, it's probably just survive until the government can come and help me. Most survival instruction and materials are predicted on the idea that survival means to persevere until help comes, until normalcy returns, which means that this type of survivalism assumes an eventual return to the crippling and atrophying way of life that put people at risk in the first place. Now, in and of itself, in the short run, there is nothing wrong with this type of survival if it is necessary and it works. The problem is that so long as we deny that our current system of life and living is unsustainable, we will refuse to move towards a more realistic and honest system of life and living. Today, whether one agrees with it or not, every person who lives dependently on the system of JIT supply and security of his modern urban culture is in daily peril of that very likely and impending reality where the system itself collapsing and is either irreparable or it cannot be restored to its former condition. So this was a lot, and I think there's some big points that I'm going to focus on. Number one, ask yourself, if the grid were to go down, that means that your grocery stores are not getting food. That means that the government will eventually have to shut down. You're not going to get water through your pipes. That means that if you're in somewhere that's colder, that eventually the electric company won't be able to heat your home. You won't have heat. How many of you would honestly be able to survive? Because I'm telling you right now, me in this current state, even in Ghana, I mean, I wouldn't be able to survive. I'm making active efforts to be able to survive without the system because I realize that I'm in a womb of its own. Are you inside of a womb? Are you inside of a womb where if your host were to die, you were to go down with it? If the system were to deplete, would you be depleting with it? Very important questions. Also, very important point that he makes. 150 years ago, no question, I'm very sure that our ancestors would have been fine with the system going down, with the state going down. They would have known how to get water, how to grow food. They would have known how to clothe themselves, make their own clothes. Let's go back before slavery and colonialism. Even better, there would have been a knowledge of how to hunt, of how to be organized in a society without a state, with how to move and maneuver, how to use your resources, herbs, things like that. That knowledge was plentiful. So it's the knowledge that we had and we lost. Because for the sake of technology and for the sake of industrialization, we've lost our sense of survival and what it actually means. So hopefully that was helpful. We're definitely going to keep going with the segment and keep looking at different ways how we can become self-sustaining. Like I said, this is a journey that I'm on. It's not a race, but in a way it kind of is a race because like he said, we're living inside of a system that we know will implode at some point. Will we be ready when it implodes? That's definitely a crucial question. So with that,